LSU showing blitz. Zhao rolls, fires, going for 6. Touchdown! Andrew Zhao reminding us that it's game week. Just 5 days away from the kickoff of Alabama and Duke, and that was Zhao with a memorable comeback against LSU. Boy, he orchestrated some big passing games back in the late 90s and early 2000s, quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Welcome back into the program. Gary Harris, Josh Smith, and intern Eli with you this morning up until 11 a.m. And we're going to go out on the Bud Light hotline and welcome in our first guest. He joins us every Monday. We've been doing a half hour, but heck, man, since it's football season, we decided to add another segment this morning so we don't have to rush. You good with that, Scott Moore?
Yes, sir, man. It's game week. Let's come out of the tunnel ready to roll, man. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Let's do this. And let's start with what we saw before we get a look ahead. Let's start with what we saw this past Saturday night in Orlando. Wow. Florida hangs on to beat Miami 24-20. I've already done a little bit of analysis on that game. Listen, it was one of the highest-rated games in college football in a long time on ESPN. It's proof that people want their football, and when you give them two marquee teams in this week 0 on Saturday night in prime time, you're going to get a big audience. And it was an entertaining game, but it was full of mistakes, poor tackling, poor decision-making. But at the end of the day, Florida did get the win, although in my opinion in rather underwhelming fashion, 24-20. What are your takeaways in that football game, particularly from the Florida point of view?
Yeah, I mean, you get a win, and it was also a win that you were expected to get all along. So, but I also think that when you look at how Florida blocked, the lack of running game there, and we've heard about Florida's receivers. Heck, I've talked about them all spring, and they were non-existent in the ball game except for a play here, a play there. So that was very disappointing, the overall execution of the offense from Florida, the inability to block Miami's front. And I understand the strength of Miami's team was their defense. They got great linebackers. All three of those guys are going to play in the league. But still, the execution, it was an ugly game. There was a lot of undiscipline on both sides of the ball, particularly Florida. Late hits, mental mistakes, mental errors. But, yeah, it was week 0. I understand that. But going forward, and we, around the SEC, we tend to analyze things like crazy, but that's our job. This wasn't a good look for Florida at all. I was looking for Felipe Franks. I was looking for the guy that I saw the last 4 games last year to end the season, the Felipe Franks of the Florida State game, the Felipe Franks of the Peach Bowl. I didn't see that guy Saturday night, and I didn't see anything out of him that said, "Hey, yeah, we've got a quarterback at Florida now that could take us to the next level." I did not see that on Saturday night. Conversely, for Miami, we did see that. We saw a redshirt freshman just kind of grow up before our eyes, make play after play after play, keep his team in the ball game, and he put his team in a position to win the game late and had a chance. So, Miami probably feels better about itself in a loss than Florida felt better about itself in a win, if you can understand that.
But at the end of the day, it is a win for Florida, and you saw in the post-game interview with ESPN the relief and the excitement on Dan Mullen's face, because he knew full well that if Florida lost that game in Orlando against Miami to start the season, it was going to be a very difficult task to get the fan base back on board. So I think at the end of the day, for Florida, it was a huge win, just in terms of that state, in terms of the perception that Mullen's trying to build that Florida is a team that can be a national power again. It's a game that he had to win. So from that standpoint, it is mission accomplished, because let's just think about this. On that final drive, Florida has a 4th and 34 where they tackle the wide receiver. If Miami scores there and winds up winning that game, 27-24, I tell you what, in Gatorland, it'd be a ugly Monday morning. So from that standpoint, Mullen survived.
Yeah, he did have to survive, and we'll forget about this game, especially when we get into September and October, and and things are moving moving on, and the game, and everybody else is playing. And this game had a lot of scrutiny in it because it was the main game on TV the other night. People weren't flipping back and forth, so everybody saw every snap of that ball game. That's usually not the case every year. You're usually paying attention to the team that you want to watch, and you watch every snap of your team. Everybody in the country, though, every football eye in the world was on that game the other night. And so everybody kind of saw, these are two okay teams playing. But, I think the thing that I take away now, Gary, is this team's got to go to Kentucky in 2 weeks. Kentucky is, by no stretch of the imagination, are the Kentucky Wildcats intimidated by Florida any longer, especially coming up getting that win last year in Gainesville. So Kentucky's sitting there, not as talented as they were a year ago, but now they feel like, you know what, maybe we can't get them again for a second straight year. So that would be a game to pay close attention to, is when they go to Kentucky in 2 weeks. That'll be a big game now for Florida.
The tackling, and I've made an issue of it this weekend, talking with some friends of mine. I think I discussed it with you. In fairness to Florida and Miami, I think we're going to see a lot of this early on. I think the tackling is not going to be up to par simply because this is live tackle football, and for some of these players, the first time they really have full live tackling is going to be in the games, because teams, in an effort to keep people healthy, in an effort to make sure that guys don't get hurt, and also just to make the practices a little more level and not giving guys bodies out. They're studying, they blow the whistles even in scrimmages. It's just not practiced the same way it used to be. And of course, now there's an emphasis on tackling correctly with the head up. But what we saw in that game is we don't see a lot of tackling where guys are running through the ball carrier anymore and wrapping them up. You see a lot of the big hits, and then you see a lot of guys trying to pull guys down. But the tackling was poor, and I think that we'll see that a lot here in these first couple weeks of the season, don't you?
Yeah, listen, there was a lack of physicality in the ball game, no doubt about it. I mean, and listen, when you can't hide that, Gary. You cannot hide a lack of physicality and prep time and all that. It definitely looked like Florida hadn't tackled since spring, and the same for Miami as well. I understand the need to practice, but people also on the other side of the coin are going, man, why does Alabama and LSU and Auburn and other teams in the SEC, Georgia, have such physical, come to Jesus scrimmages? Well, that's why. It's a necessary evil that you have to go through during fall practice. You've got to teach tackling. You've got to hit each other. You've got to go through those scrimmages so you can figure out what kind of football team you are, and to teach the physicality that you're going to need to get to a 15-game schedule. So, to me, I don't know if anybody asked Dan Mullen that. I haven't seen a comment about it. But you could tell the lack of fundamentals in that game Saturday night reared their ugly head time and time again. So, to me, I think you were right on target. Us that have been around football all our lives and seen what, high execution looks like. And look, I'm not expecting them to execute at the greatest level week one. I'm not expecting that. But I am expecting fundamentals of the game, blocking and tackling and mental errors, to not be at such an awful level like it was the other night. That was one of the ugliest games that I've ever seen in college football, no matter what week it was. And that gets back, I think, to a lack of preparation and really, dialing it back from a physicality standpoint during the summer. You're right on about that.
Before we get to the break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into this schedule coming up in week one in the SEC. But did you stay up and watch the Arizona-Hawaii game?
Of course, man.
Okay.
Sure did. Sure did.
Well, listen, it is what it is. And there is no doubt Hawaii's got a game plan, and that is we're going to outscore you. We are going to try to get some turnovers occasionally, but we're going to go for it on fourth down. Our whole way we play is to score points. And defensively, it's just to try to get a stop every now and then. For Arizona and Kevin Sumlin, I don't think this is going to end well. I was surprised when they hired him after he got canned at A&M. You force 7 turnovers, and you lose the game. again, now Hawaii plays a different way, and this is just a different type of football, and it is entertaining. It's not my cup of tea. I still like to think that football that you can win with defense, and that you can get stops, and you can dictate the game on the defensive end. But these two teams, it's just about going out and scoring points. And at 45-38, I thought it'd be more like 52-45, and it could have been very easily. If Khalil Tate scores at the end of the game, we got overtime, and it could have really gotten wild. But your thoughts on that game, that style of football, and Hawaii winning a game in which they turn it over 7 times. Old school football, you would have never, ever even sniffed a win with 7 turnovers. But now, with as many possessions as teams get and going for it on 4th down and throwing it over the field, you can turn it over 7 times and win a football game, Scott. It blows my mind.
Yeah. I know that was, and I think at one time during that stretch, I think I'm right about this. I think they threw 3 interceptions Hawaii on 3 consecutive possessions, and it was like, are you kidding me? And the thing is all 3 times that happened, Arizona had the ball in great field position and couldn't capitalize on any of it. I mean, they got way behind, which was, I think, a shock to them that they got so far behind. But and we're playing catch-up the entire night. Khalil Tate was the best player on the field and one of the best players in the Pac-12, and he made play after play after play and had to overcome penalty after penalty and bad mistake. I mean, Gary, they were trying to tie or get the game within the score late. They had 3 procedure penalties in a row, went from a 25-yard field goal to a 50-yard field goal, and the kids still made it. But it was a highly entertaining game, but I've never. You're right. I've never seen anybody win a game with getting 7 turnovers and playing the way that they played. And mistake all. I mean, every single play had some kind of crazy mistake on it, and still Khalil Tate, comes up a yard short on a great scramble late in the ball game. So and you could tell he took his helmet off, went straight to the locker room. He was just disgusted. The team found a way to lose that ball game. But you're right. Look, Kevin Sumlin, he is, man, from that first opening game in 2014 when they just absolutely destroyed South Carolina, his career has just taken a fall. And you're right. This guy cannot coach the game of college football at a high level. And it's not going to end well at Arizona for him.
All right, we're about to get to our first break. We're going to come back, and we're going to jump into week 1 full speed.
He's got the block. Now he's got an angle, and it's a foot race to the corner. Touchdown, Alabama. There are no...
Cyrus Jones, another great number 5 in Alabama football history. The countdown to kickoff is on. It's game week. And Scott Moore from the Jay Barker Show and iTalkSEC Radio is with me to preview game 1, or week 1, and game 1 for the Crimson Tide. And let's jump right in on Alabama, Scott. We'll try to touch on these other games as well. We've got another segment after this one. But Alabama and Duke, Saturday afternoon, 2:30 Central Time, kickoff in the Chik-Fil-A kickoff game over in Atlanta. By the way, Gary Stokin from the Chik-Fil-A Bowl will be with me on Thursday here on the show to talk about the game. But Alabama is a prohibitive favorite, obviously, in this game. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't believe they're going to win. But I think we will all be watching for the things that we talked about with Florida. How crisp is Alabama offensively? Are they tackling well on defense? Are some of the areas of concern, inside linebacker, that spot next to Dylan Moses, the tight end position? We'll be watching a lot of things in this first game to kind of get a feel for how we think this Alabama team will play in 2019. What are you most anxiously anticipating on Saturday afternoon?
Well, I'm like everybody. I think I want to just see this team play and just see, the size, the speed, the athleticism. We already know about the eye test. And with all these Alabama teams in the Saban area, you always want to see, what the new guys in the program are going to be able to do under pressure and when the lights go on and the cameras go up. And so I think that the only time I can remember Alabama not playing well in the opener, you look back, there's a couple of incidences where you go, okay, they struggled a little bit. They struggled against Virginia Tech over there in the opener. I believe it's in 2013. Couldn't run the ball, couldn't really get things going, but that was against a good Bud Foster defensive football team. and everybody was like, wow, can't run the football. Well, same thing happened against Kent State. I don't think Trent Richardson even got near 100 yards against Kent State. They went to Penn State the next week and played well. So we've seen them, not play well in a couple of openers, but we haven't seen this amount of talent come back from a prolific year before. And so I think Saturday, I think the offense is, again, champing at the bit to get on the field. And I think they're going to put up big numbers. I think it's going to be really tough to slow them down. I think they'll play with an attitude and an anger. And if they do that, Gary, this game's going to get out of hand quick. But I think that's what most people want to see this Alabama team do. Get off to a fast start, dominate, keep your foot on their throat, and do not let up the entire ball game. So that's what I'm looking for Saturday. And I think anything less than that, I think would be a disappointment, to be quite frank.
How important is it right off the bat, even with Tua and the receivers, that Alabama established this running game? You lose Damian Harris, you lose Josh Jacobs. There's been a lot of talk, including by me, that Alabama was not as physical in the run game last year as has been in the past. You've got two big backs in Najee Harris and Brian Robinson. How important is it, in your opinion, even with all these weapons on offense, that this running game establish early in the season that, hey, we can run it on third and short and make first downs. We can eat up clock when we want to. We don't have to just throw it around the ballpark all the time. We can grind you out as well.
Well, it was a disappointing finish last year because they didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher. Okay, that's the first time that's happened since 2010. When you had Mark Ingram, you had Eddie Lacy, and you had Trent Richardson, did not have a 1,000-yard rusher that year. And I know that people go, wow, that's inexplicable, but it's true. So, listen, you've got to go out, establish a tailback. You've got to show that you get yards when you need them, because to win a national title this year, you're going to have to be able to run the football and get a push on the offensive line and dominate at the point of attack. I think that was missing last year. I don't think that element's going to be missing this year, Gary. The offensive line is bigger, it's stronger, and yes, it is more talented than it was a year ago, okay? Despite the fact you lose a first-round draft pick at tackle and another guy that's going to play a while in the league as well. So I like this offensive line. I think they have gone back and said, you know what, we've got to be more physical. We've got to knock guys off the ball. And I'm looking forward to seeing that aspect on Saturday as well. I think the running backs in Alabama's roster this year, starting with Najee, Brian Robinson, and Ford, and maybe one or two other guys, I think they're going to have a big year this year, Gary.
Defensively, because of the way the season ended last year, and because of the amount of pass plays, they gave up over 20 yards. It's, I think, 92nd in the country defensively in giving up pass plays over 20 yards. Even with the shutouts against LSU and Mississippi State, there were a lot of games when Alabama was in control, and late in the games, when it still counts, scoreboard still operates, they gave up big plays. I mean, it just was hanging over this defense the whole season that, hey, there's a propensity there for the other team to make plays. And for this defense, even if the game's in hand, let's say, late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter, do you think they're still going to be grinding, still have some of their better guys out there in an attempt to establish this defense in a different manner from the one that we saw last year, and that, hey, we're not going to give up big plays? Even late in the game when the game is decided, we're going to continue to grind and find a way to stop you. How important is it for this defensive team and these defensive coaches to establish Alabama's identity on that side of the ball? Because maybe last year it was lost a little bit.
Yeah, you got to set a tone, Gary, particularly against Duke Saturday, and then go out through September and October, because the month of November is a grind. Everybody knows that, and championships are won during that time. Listen, last year there were botched assignments, but the thing that scratched your head last year were all like, you're having botched assignments in game 12, 13, and 14 last year. You're like, it was an 80-yard touchdown run by Auburn. It got called back. But you have that in the Iron Bowl. You have also a big play where Georgia goes off and scores a truckload of points on you. In that ball game, they were running it, they're throwing it, and then we saw what Oklahoma did. And a lot of that you're playing great teams, sure. But a lot of that were busted assignments, people not being in the right place, and then a lack of pass rush. Alabama couldn't get pressure on the quarterback last year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I think you're going to get pressure, and I'm talking about from the outside. Cornell Williams dominated the middle last year, and other guys had big years as well. But they didn't have a consistent pass rush, and people ran the ball on Alabama late in the year when they wanted to. And you can't let that happen. Great Alabama teams on defense, particularly in the Saban era, they have been devastating against the run and devastating giving up big plays, explosive plays of 20 yards or more, okay? I think those plays are going to be few and far between this year. Pressure is going to come from the edge. I think they get a push inside. And the secondary ought to be a strength this year, meaning there ought to be a big-time lack of missed assignments this year, particularly when you get into November and December when everybody has a cohesive unit operating and everybody knows what they're going to be doing. So I expect that aspect of the defense to get really cleaned up from a fundamental standpoint and a physicality standpoint as well.
Do you think this game is competitive into the second quarter, into the second half? I mean, how do you think it goes? Do you think Alabama just blitzes them? Or do you think first game of the year, Duke has some wrinkles, they've got a good coach, they find a way to make this game interesting for a while? How do you see it playing out?
Well, listen, Alabama completely overmatches them. You know, Duke can't line up and play 4 quarters with Alabama. We all know that. Okay, so, but I will tell you this: Duke played Clemson awfully tight last year for a little while, and then Clemson, the athleticism took over. I expect Duke to play well, to have a good game plan, but from a physicality standpoint, they don't have Daniel Jones any longer, so they don't have a prolific quarterback. They don't have the depth. They got a decent offensive line. Defensively, they're probably going to be an average ACC bunch. You know, I think Alabama does what it did last year, and particularly down in Orlando. I think they get off to a huge start, a fast start, quick start, big plays. You're testing out your weapons, so to speak. You're out there driving the Ferrari, seeing what you can get out of it. And I think Alabama runs off to a really, really comfortable lead. I know that Coach Saban probably don't want to hear that, but listen, we've been around football a long time. Alabama fans want to see this team play. There's excitement. There'll be a truckload of them in Atlanta. It'll be an Alabama home game there. Alabama has played very well in Atlanta, and that's what I expect to see, Gary. I expect to see this team get on the throat and keep the pedal down all afternoon and really try to put what happened in December and January last year behind them once and for all. And the best way to do it is go out Saturday and play at a high level.
All right, one final thought on Alabama. Jalen Hurts is gone. Last year, early in the season, Alabama rolled to huge leads. Jalen played quite a bit, of course, for 2 reasons. Number one, to get Tua out of the game, and number 2, because Dave Saban said he wanted Jalen to have a role based on his history with the program. He's not here now, but there's Mac Jones, who is establishing himself as the backup quarterback. I think we all expect him to be listed number 2 on the depth chart. How do you think the approach will be with Tua? There were a lot of games last year, as I said, that he was on the sidelines when he could have continued to be ringing up numbers, getting into even more of a rhythm with his receivers. I don't think there's any doubt they'd love for him to win the Heisman Trophy. At the same time, he got beat up toward the end of last season. Do you think Mac Jones plays as much in these games as a backup in an effort to get him experience as Jalen did last year, or do you think we see Tua deeper into the games in second halves this year, even if Alabama's in charge?
That's a great question. I think you'll see him on Saturday deep into the fourth quarter because I think they need to. I think they learned a lot from not playing guys in the fourth quarter last year. Believe it or not, I think it caught up to them, particularly against Georgia, particularly against Oklahoma, and certainly against Clemson. It caught up to them. And I think that they need to establish themselves. Guys need to play in the fourth quarter. Again, Saban says, hey, they'll pay attention to the scoreboard, right? Well, if that's true, get out there and play. And I think you'll see a lot of guys playing deep into the fourth quarter. And then, if the game gets out of hand, which I expect it to do so, I think you see a lot of young guys as well. So, but I think you'll see a different approach this year on how they handle the fourth quarter, and I think a different approach is needed if you want to get to where you want to get this season. And listen, the only goal this year is get to New Orleans and win the national title. And if you're going to do that, you got to do things differently than you did last year.
All right, we're going to take a time out here on the program. When we come back, Auburn and Oregon. Interesting matchup on Saturday night coming up in Arlington, Texas. And we'll touch on a few of these other opening week games. We've even got an SEC versus SEC game with Vanderbilt and Georgia. We'll be back with one more segment with Scott Moore. 9:49. Welcome back into the Gary Harris Show. One more segment with Scott Moore from the Jay Barker Show and iTalkSEC Radio. Give me your thoughts on Oregon and Auburn Saturday night in Arlington, Texas. The Tigers going with the true freshman quarterback Bo Nix under center. Of course, Oregon would counter with the veteran Justin Herbert. Who do you think has the edge in this game?
Well, I think when you look at it, I think Auburn does with the defense. I think that's the one unit, that's the best unit on the field for both teams, is Auburn's defense. And defense wins championships, and defense always tends to dominate in early games. And I think Auburn's got the edge there with their ability to put pressure on Justin Herbert, their physicality. I just think up front, they're going to cause them a lot of problems. This is a really good Oregon team, Gary, but they're a little undersized on both sides of the line. And that's been Oregon's problem in big games, particularly against the SEC in the last few years. So Herbert is a big guy, can run, can throw, has a big arm, very, very talented. He's one of the more talented quarterbacks Auburn will see all year, and he can make plays with his legs and his arms. So I think Auburn can limit those plays because of their defense, and I think Auburn's offensive line is good enough to also move around the Oregon defense as well. I think Auburn can run the ball. The other question for me, how healthy are Auburn's wide receivers right now? They've been banged up all spring and all fall. And what's Eli Stove going to be able to do in this game? What's Will Hastings going to be able to do in this game? I know Schwartz is out with a hand injury, and he's a fast guy. So these teams, though, outside of all that, are very even, I think. So, but to me, I think Auburn has the edge. They've played in these kind of games before. They've played in the SEC. They've played in big environments. They were in a dome last year to open against Washington. They're not going to be intimidated by this kind of atmosphere. You know, I think Auburn has got a real shot in this game, Gary, to get off to a good start.
We got an SEC versus SEC game right off the bat.
Dude.
And clearly, if you win the game, man, you feel like you got one up on everybody. If you lose, then, you know, you're fighting uphill. Vanderbilt hosts Georgia. Obviously, Georgia's a better football team, but it is a season opener. It is in Nashville. Everybody's going to be jacked up. Any chance, in your opinion, that Vanderbilt makes this one interesting or not?
No, they'll play hard. You know, this is one of those, you know, Vanderbilt always plays Georgia hard. They always play Florida hard. And we've seen when they used to be on Alabama's schedule, that was one of those games you were just kind of dreading. Oh, man, got to play Vanderbilt. And when you catch Vandy early in the year, they tend to hang around a little bit and play well. But this game, to me, I start looking at it going, okay, is this going to end up like maybe 2017 did when Alabama rolled into Nashville and they were coming off a big win and were feeling really good about themselves, and Alabama just absolutely destroyed them. You know, Georgia's got that kind of physicality. I think Vanderbilt can hang around for a little bit, but in Georgia, just too many athletes, too much physicality, too many great running backs and players on offense, and Georgia's offensive line just may eat Vanderbilt alive. So it'll be entertaining for a bit, and then Georgia is going to go in there, and their talent and their depth's going to take over.
Mack Brown is back for a second stint in Chapel Hill. Will Muschamp is trying to get South Carolina into contender status in the SEC East. When you look at South Carolina's schedule, it's brutal. But Mack Brown has brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm to North Carolina. This game's in Charlotte. South Carolina versus North Carolina. What's your take?
Well, North Carolina, again, you look at the obvious. North Carolina starts a true freshman quarterback. That's going to be interesting right there. And guess what? Carolina's got one of the most experienced signal callers they've ever had coming back. This is a pretty decent South Carolina team. Well, it'll be interesting to see the dynamics without Deebo Samuel this year. But Jake Bentley is a prolific quarterback, had a really great end to last season. And I just think because of him, he's the best player on the field Saturday. I think North Carolina is going to have a very, very difficult time slowing down South Carolina. And I think South Carolina will play a physical brand of football that North Carolina is not used to. So I tend to like South Carolina week one in this ball game. And quite frankly, I think there'll be more South Carolina fans at that game than North Carolina Blue Ridge fans.
One of the best games of this opening weekend might be at the Liberty Bowl. Ole Miss and
Absolutely.
Memphis. Yep. And I hate it's an 11 a.m. kick. That ought to be a little later in the day to me. But let's be honest. For what, Matt Luke's trying to get done at Ole Miss, this is a big game. It's a rivalry game. It's a recruiting area for Ole Miss. They feel like when they go to Memphis, it's a home game for them. But this Memphis team, in my opinion, at home, they have a little bit of an edge against Ole Miss. How do you see it?
They do, and they're favored by 6.5 points in this ball game for a reason. Look, Mike Norvell is one of the bright young minds in college football. They have a prolific offense. They score a lot of points. Listen, quite frankly, they should have beaten Central Florida the last 2 years. They had them on the road to 2 double-digit leads and lost both those. And so, listen, from a personnel standpoint, Memphis matches up with Ole Miss very, very well, and Matt Corral gets the start as a redshirt freshman. He's played 4 games for Ole Miss. They lost 3 great receivers. Their running game, I don't know who's going to print the mail for them. So don't be surprised at all if Ole Miss doesn't lose this football game in Memphis. Memphis is a good team, Gary, and this is a tough opener for the Rebels.
All right, Scott, we've only got a couple of minutes, so let's move to it. A couple of interesting games to me because these teams are going on the road. Mississippi State's going to Lafayette to play Louisiana. Tommy Stevens is the quarterback. Keaton Thompson already said, I'm out of here. Is this one that could get a little hairy for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I think this whole season with suspensions and everything going on, the town being lost last year, I don't think there's any certainty for Mississippi State this year at all. And, we're really going to find out about this coaching staff and can this coaching staff get this team ready to play, particularly in games that are off the radar a little bit. This is a tough spot for Mississippi State. They should win the game. They got more talent, but it'll be an interesting ball game on Saturday for sure. I'd be watching this one closely. This reminds me of when South Alabama went to Mississippi State and beat them a couple of years ago. So anything's possible in this game. I think Mississippi State will pull it out, but I think it's going to be closer than everybody thinks.
And 30 seconds. Mizzou goes to Wyoming. Trap game for the Tigers?
I don't think so. First game of the year, and I think Kelly Bryant is ready to get back out there. And I think pay close attention to Missouri, Gary. I think they got a chance to have a big year, and we'll start with Wyoming on Saturday.
Thank you, Scott. Good stuff as always. Enjoy listening to you on iTalkSEC and the Jay Barker Show. And, folks, you can follow him on Twitter at iTalkSEC. Appreciate it, man.